Bom dia. Alright, let's try that again. Alright, let's try that again. Hola. Bom dia. Feliz aniversario. So, this is going to be making an apple pie. It's a little bit of an instructional video for Carolina for her birthday. The pie itself is going to be Carolina's pan-fried apple pie because of a severe shortage in functional ovens in Brazil right now. So we're going to do the classic with some apples and some apple pie. So first off, I'm getting, let's see, I can't really turn the screen around after I started filming on one side, so this is going to be extra fun. I'm showing you that I'm getting some apples out, and these apples that I'm using are Golden Delicious, but you can pretty much use any apple, with the exception of Red Delicious. They're pretty mealy, nasty apples. You want to go for something that's got a little bit of a tang to it, a little bit of a sharpness. So Golden Delicious, Granny Smith, they've got a little bit more bite to them. They're a little bit more crisp, so I seem to prefer those. I usually don't go for any deep red apples. They're usually more mealy and not very flavorful. It's not just that they're not very sour, it's that they're not even very sweet. They're just the cardboard of apples. So I've got some apples. I've got, let's see, I think I've got 8 apples. So what I'm going to be using these for is just pretty much the majority of the pie is going to be these, and so usually I will cut more apples than will actually fit into the pie, with the concept that they'll cook down a little bit. Now, because we're not going to be cooking it in the oven, we're going to be cooking it in a pan. What I've found is they don't cook down as much because we're cooking them, I think, at a higher heat and without that same sort of compression that's happening in the oven. So we're going to be, we'll have some excess left over, but I'm going to be starting off with 8. You can see they're kind of large apples. Don't worry about like having it go to waste. There, that's actually not a bad shot. Okay. All right, so there's our apple. We're going to be preparing this. So what I usually do is quarter the apple, and then going to get the core out. So I'm cutting in an angle like that, and cutting in from an angle on the other side. We got that. We can just compost that or what have you. So you can do that for each quarter. And in addition to just trying to get the seeds out, there's a small internal rind. I'm not sure if that's really showing up on the camera. It's a small hard rind that protects the seeds inside of the apple. And it's pretty dense cellulose, so that's not going to cook down as much. And if it goes into the pie, it's just going to be like this little, it's kind of like the shell around popcorn. It's going to get, in your teeth. It's going to be no fun. Okay. So now I'm going to take each quarter, and I'm just going to be cutting these slices a little thin. So here's one slice. You can see I'm going for about the thickness of a quarter. So kind of a coin-like thickness on these. And if you go much thinner than that, that's fine. If you go much thicker than that, that's also fine. What it's going to be changing is it's going to be changing the way the heat gets into the apple. If you're going for thicker slices, you're going to see that it cooks a little bit slower, and you're not going to get as much of the apple cooked down as you would if you had a thinner slice. So the thinner slices actually will cook down a lot more, and you're going to see them turn almost into a sort of a, what do I want to say? Almost like an apple gel. They'll lose a lot of their structure. So if you're looking for like a apple pie where you really have something that you're biting into with your teeth, and you still looking for something that's got some toothsomeness to it, cut these a little bit wider. If you're looking for something where you're just looking for that sort of like reduction, that compote where you've got a bite full and it's just all apple, sort of like an apple crumble, then you're going to be cutting these a little bit thicker. So that's what's guiding my philosophy on these things. So I'm going to do that now for the rest of these apples, and then we're going to get started on cooking. Okay, so in the preparations, we're also going to be putting these not into the oven in a pie pan, but instead we're going to be putting them into a pan. So here's our pan. I'm using kind of a deeper pan. We're going to pile the apples up so that we've got a little bit more space to play with. I went for a deeper pan. So in preparing the pan, I'm going to be using a little bit of butter. So here I'm using salted butter. You could also use olive oil. That's just fine too. Alright, so a little bit of butter here. So I'm just going for kind of a reasonable slice. It's about, I don't know, yeah, it's about the size of a, I mean, there's my hand for comparison, and it's about the thickness of, I would say 2/4, or about the thickness of the apples themselves. So I've put the heat on this, and that's going to start to melt. In addition to it melting, I'm going to also be putting a little bit of water in. So got some water here. If you're looking for something that's really fancy and you've actually got access to it, instead of water, you can also use apple cider. So the apple cider, obviously it's going to enhance the flavor of the apples. It's going to be a little bit more apples in there. That's nice. So you can take just an extra hit of apples there. So in either case, using the water or the apple cider, I'm looking to cover the bottom of the pan. And we're going to let that mix in there with the butter while I'm... oh, one last thing. If you have access to it and you want to help the flavor out a little bit, at this point you can put in just a little bit of vanilla extract. So, and by just a little bit, I mean something along the lines of a spoonful. So, all right, gotta use my hands. I'm gonna put that down there. So 1 spoonful right on in. And we're looking to get the pan here up to temperature so that it's boiling. Now, before it actually starts to boil, we're going to be looking for that butter to melt. And once that butter is melted, we want to sort of mix it into the cider or water. Either way, we're looking to just get that butter moved around and equally mixed in. Alright, so once that's mixed in, we can start to put our apples in. And so putting the apples in, it's going to be sort of where you separate them manually as you put each slice in, and then you scatter them into the bottom of the pan. I'm not sure how well this is showing up. I kind of wish I could see what I was doing besides like holding this thing. Well, yeah, that's what you get. Whew. All right. So now we've got our apples in, and we're, well, that's one apple. I'll get the other ones in as we proceed, and the next thing to do will be to sort of add the cinnamon and nutmeg and some sugar. So I'm going to get the rest of the apples in, and then we'll come back to this. Okay. So, in the preparation of the apples, I noticed that I'd cut up 4 apples, and I already got to a pretty good depth in terms of apples. So these apples were larger than I think I expected. So I'm not actually cutting up all 8 of them. I'm only going to be cutting up 5 of them, so I've got 3 left over there. Yeah. So I've got 3 left over. This should be plenty of enough apples, so I want to just say that I'm revising the recipe already, just by a little bit. We're just going to be using less of these apples. Please, if your apples are smaller, fill up the pan. We're looking for, like, you know, a lot of apples, but not overboard. So, hello. So, right, I've got the apples. They're in the pan. We've got them marinating in that little bit of water or apple cider that we put in, plus that butter. And you can see we're already starting to get some differentiation. There's some of them that are starting to cook down. Others, I just put them in and they're still relatively fresh, so we want to mix those in. We want to keep this moving for a little bit. They're already starting to get nice and tender. You can touch them, feel them going soft. And it's a little hot, but you can kind of shake them around. See that? So we're already in the process of getting a nice reduction on these. They're already starting to give up their moisture. We want to keep some of that moisture in there, but I want to also keep the apples moving so that it's not just that the bottom layer in contact with the bottom of the pan gets cooked, but you get that consistently all the way through. We're losing some moisture, and part of that is fine. You know, you don't want to have too wet of a mix going into the apple pie, but we also want to keep it well oiled. So one of the things that can happen is as the water evaporates out, you're going to be reducing it down to its basic sugars, right? So your fructoses. And those can caramelize if they get too hot. So we're going to be using a combination of keeping it moving and also adding butter so that it's nice and oily. The butter is also going to help the flavor a bit. It's going to make it a little bit creamier. It's going to make it a little bit richer. I usually will only add maybe in total a couple of slices of butter. So, you know, if you've got like a stick of it, maybe 1/4 of that stick is ultimately what we'll be putting into this. The rest of it, we're going to be putting it into the crust, which I'm about to start making. So while I start making that, I'm going to give this one last mix, and lid on it. If you've got a lid, you put one on. Otherwise, you're going to be continuing to add water so that you're countering the amount that you're losing to evaporation. But if you've got a lid, get the lid out. You can turn the temperature down. So before I was cooking this, maybe on high, medium high. Now I can do the rest of this at a nice low temperature. So now ready to start the crust. Great, so now we're going to make the pie crust, and the trick with the pie crust is we're looking to add, so there's going to be a ratio of butter to flour, right? The only thing that we're going to be putting into the pie crust is going to be flour, butter, a little bit of water. So what we're looking for here is something where the butter to flour ratio is pretty high. We're not going to be adding eggs, baking soda, or anything like that. Those would make the crust more bread-like. Instead, what we're looking for is something more croissant-like. So heavy on the butter and very little else. So to accomplish this, we're going to be using, I've got some bread flour. You can use, I really recommend like white flour, so not like whole wheat. You'll need 2 cups of that. And by cups, I mean milliliters, and that's 250 milliliters. Great. So 250 milliliters of flour, and then for the butter, that's going to be it's a half cup of butter. So that's going to be about 150 milliliters of butter. If you measure butter with milliliters, that seems weird. Essentially, if you're buying it in sticks, right, you're just going to probably be using 1 stick. So first off, let's measure out the flour. We'll get that going here. So to measure this out, I'm just pouring it into the cup, right? Kind of give it a little bit of a shake to get that pile down. It doesn't have to be too exact. Just put it into the bowl. Great. That's that. So that's 1 cup. I'm going to put in another cup. So I'm making both the top crust and the bottom crust at the same time. So there's another cup. There we go, into the bowl. I've got the butter. I'm going to add some salt. So how much salt am I adding? I'm adding a teaspoon, 1/4 teaspoon. I don't know what that works out to in metric. Boy, I'm gonna also make some notes for this, and I'll put the conversions into the notes. I should have looked this up before, but yeah, no. What am I saying, meh? I spent all morning working on that functional analysis for the KEGG objects and pathways, so that's what I've... I don't have to apologize. That was what I did. That was my very productive professional day. So now I'm going to be doing the butter, and for the butter, you want to keep the butter as cool as you can as you mix it into the flour. So for something like that, if you touch it too much, the butter melts and then it turns into sort of a sticky mess with the flour. So some people will chop it up into little diced cubes and then mix the cubes in. You can do that if you want. But what I like is a little trick that I learned from Kate's sister Liz, which is to use a cheese grater. Cheese grater. Also, this is the same trick that they use on the British Baking Show, which I really hope that you're watching because it's so much fun. All right, it's just that they're very nice to each other. I think the world would be a better place if we replaced our world leaders with British Baking Show judges. Okay, so I'm just manhandling my butter right there like it's cheese. I'm just mixing it right in using the grater. Okay. Now, the butter is already starting to melt in my hand. This might be even harder if you're in an equatorial climate. Just try and keep it moving as fast as you can. as you mix it in. And if you feel like you're getting behind, you can always stop and pop it in the fridge and wait for it to harden again before you go to the mixing step. Great, so I've got my approximate 1 stick of butter in there for 1 cup. Because I'm using 2 cups, I'm going to get the other stick of butter out. So there's my second stick, approximate, and shave that in. Now I'm using salted butter, and I'm adding salt to the crust, so you can see where my blood pressure lies. But if you've got unsalted butter, you can pretty much just add some extra salt to the crust. If you like a salty crust, I do. You'd probably be looking to add about 2 quarter teaspoons, so a half a teaspoon. Geez, man, my math. You can tell I'm working from a script on this, right? I memorized all my lines, wrote them down in advance. Great. Almost done with the butter. Ouch. It really catches your fingers there after a bit. That is the downside of using a cheese grater. Great. So now you've got a very buttery hand. You've got a very buttery... just trying to get all that butter off that you can. Butter. So, get a knife, scrape out the inside of that, get that butter in there. Great. So I do think that the butter started to melt a little bit. So I'm going to put this in the fridge to chill. I've just got a pile of butter and flour. I haven't even mixed them together yet. So before I mix them together, I'm going to let it chill, get a little cooler before I get my hands into it. Move this over. Right, so for chilling, I'm putting it in the fridge. There we go. Right, so about those apples. So I let the apples sit in a pan. Now I'd taken the pan off and turned it down. And I let it cook on low with the lid on for about 10 minutes. If you don't have the lid on, you might want to give it a little bit extra time, maybe 15 minutes. But anyways, you're just cooking it until you've got sort of a nice variety of differently cooked apples. So I've got some apples that have been like cooked into a mush, and I've got some other apples that still have some body to them. So when I mix these together, they're going to be a real nice mix of of different textures and different apple bits. That's going to be just what we're looking for. And we're stopping. Right, so got the butter back out of the fridge. So there we go. So that's the butter and the flour. We're gonna mix those together now that it's hopefully a little chilled out. So for this mixing, I'm going to add a little water. Now the amount of water that I'm adding is pretty sparse. I would say don't add more than 1 cup. I mean, 1/4 of a cup of water, which would be about 75 mils. So don't add anything more than that, and don't add it all at once. What you're looking for is you're just going to be mixing the... Yeah, there we go. Okay, didn't lose it. So there's that. So we're looking to mix the butter in with the flour. So I'm being pretty ginger with it, kind of moving around with my fingers, trying to squish the flour and butter together with the hand. Now you'll see that even when it does get mixed up, there's still a lot of dry flour around, so I'm going to add a little bit more water. Yep, so yes, there's a little bit more water. Mix that in there. Perfect. Boy, alright. So you can see why I'm adding the water little by little. I don't want to pour all of it in at once because it might be more than I need. I want to be as cautious with the water as I can so that it doesn't turn into a soup. So I'm looking for just enough to hold it all together. And the water, I like to use cold water. It helps keep the butter cold, and ultimately that's what's going to be giving you some nice flaky crust. So, almost done with this. You see it's starting to come together nicely. And there's still some flaky bits to it. Maybe a little bit more water, just a touch. This is really dangerous. Just want to be very careful as you get close to the end. It's really easy to put too much water and then wind up with soupy crust. If you do wind up with soupy crust, if it's when you overwater it, it's going to start to just turn into a wet, sticky ball. And if that happens, you can just add a little bit more flour. So that's going to work out. Right. I've probably overworked this. I did say I want to kind of keep it to a minimum, how much I was working it. This is a little bit more than I wish I would have done, but that's all right. Let's take a look. So here we go. This is, you can see there's still like some flaky bits to it. It's still very easy for that to fall apart. It's still in sort of crusty bits. So this is ready to be rolled out. So I'm gonna set up the countertop now for that. And I'm gonna just put this in. So this is the countertop. We're gonna be using this to roll out the flour. So the first thing you want to do is just scatter a little bit of flour down on the countertop. There we go. We just want to put enough down so that the crust that we made just doesn't immediately stick to the countertop. Now if you don't have a countertop that's good for this, you can use a cutting board with a little bit of flour on it. You can put some parchment down, put a little bit of flour on the parchment. Aluminum foil also works really well. All of those are kind of a little bit more of a hassle because it's going to be moving around on you. But if you don't have a good countertop for this, like if it's a wooden countertop or maybe like something you don't want food to come into contact with, there's some other options there. So now I'm getting the pie crust out. In the interest of keeping it cool, I popped it in the fridge while I cleaned off my countertop. But here we go. And we've got a little bit left down there in the bottom. Yeah, there we go. Right, so I've got this giant ball of it, and the way I'm going to handle this is I'm going to use a rolling pin. If you don't have a rolling pin, what you can use instead is a round glass bottle. So obviously dump the water out first, but what you would be using this for is to sort of roll it around. I've got a really nice rolling pin, so I'm going to use that instead. Just trying to get into it there. Nope, let me set this up. Yeah, that's a good angle. All right. So with this crust, I'm working from the center and trying to push it out to the edges. Now, the amount of crust that I'm going to need is half of this is for the bottom, the other half is for the top. So I want to roll it a little thin so that I've got enough for both. Alright, so now I've rolled it out like so. Yep. Now it's not nearly large enough, or I'm going to need a lot more than just this. But I'm also going to flip it. So one of the nice things when it's still thick enough, you can flip it with one hand. Once I get this thinner, it'll take me probably both my hands to flip it. And one of the reasons why I'm flipping it, and this may not be a problem for you, is that I've noticed that with this countertop, it will stick to the countertop if you roll it around too long and it gets too thin. The butter will just start to stick right to the countertop. The nice thing about the pan-fried pie is that it doesn't really matter if the crust stays as one continuous piece. You can get away with it breaking into pieces because you're going to be frying them anyways. So it's going to be in pieces when you cook it, and it's going to be in pieces so that you have to reassemble it. So it doesn't really matter that there's one contiguous piece. Right, so I've got it smoothed down. It's thinner now. It's probably about as thick as a quarter. So I cut down the mid of it. I'm going to fold up one of these. I'm going to put that in the fridge. That's going to be the top half. And that's in the fridge. While that's doing its thing, I'm going to, and by doing its thing I mean cooling down. And for this one, roll it back up and get that rolling pin back into it. Before I start, I should probably put a little bit more flour down. There we go. Alright. Get that going. So again, with the rolling, trying to go from the middle out to the edges. So you're smoothing it out the whole time. For me, I've already overworked my crust, so it's getting a little stiff, which is a pain. I put a little extra muscle into it when it gets stiff like that. It also means that it's going to be a little bit chewy when we're done. So, plenty of room for improvement. One of the fun things about baking, I guess, is you always mess it up somehow. But more often than not, the results are pretty good. Delicious, at least. Right. Alright, so there's my crust. Eyeballing it. It's maybe about as thick as a single quarter, and it's kind of large. You could visually see how it would like go into a pie tin, right? So let's get that pie tin out for a little comparison. Here's my pie tin, right? Now the nice thing about the pan pie is you don't actually need a pie tin. We're going to be cooking everything in the pan. The pie tin is really just for show. You could just as easily assemble this in a deep dish, like a plate, as you could like a pie thing. But I'm going to be using the pie thing, the pie tin. There we go. So, size-wise, this is kind of what I'm looking at, right? So I've got enough to cover the base. Obviously, if that's being filled in, I'm going to need a little bit on the edges to compensate for it. So, we're ready for this step. And for this step, we're going to be cutting the bread into sixths. So, total of 3 cuts. Not exactly even, but that's okay. I'm just looking to get them to the point where they're the size that I could put them into a pan. Alright, so got the pan. You notice I'm using a different pan than the one the apples are in. I've done this previously using just a single pan. It's definitely doable. I'm just doing it this way so that I'm not having to take the apples out of the pan, put them into a bowl, and then later put them back into another pan again. So I'm going to be using 2 pans. You could use just one. So for the pan, you can use more butter. We're going to be going for a bit of a fry on this, so a little bit of extra butter is not going to be the end of the world. Unless you have issues with cholesterol, in which case olive oil works just fine. It does have a little bit of a taste like olive oil, but if you don't like olive oil, sunflower oil. It's very expensive, but it's really good. It's a high temperature oil, so you can really get it cooked up. The adventures of cooking in action. Turn it off your own camera. Alright, that's a little bit better. So, pan, butter, just a little bit of butter. Really just trying to coat the bottom of the pan for this fry. Yeah, so usually I'm doing this on something of a high heat. You can, if you're more cautious and you want to avoid the high heat, you can definitely cook it at a lower temperature. That's going to make the pastry crust a little less flaky. Again, because you're melting the butter before you're cooking the flour, so it's going to be a little bit chewy. Not a bad thing. So I've got spatula. I'm moving the butter around in the pan, make sure it's nice. It's getting all over the inside of the pan. And now I'm going to take my first piece. Aww. Yeah, well, it looked like a heart for a second. Anyways, throw pour it into the pan. And we wait for it to cook. There we go. So a couple of things to note. Even though I'm using a high heat, I'm getting the crust in there before the butter has started to burn. The butter is just starting to get up temperature. Obviously it's already melted, but it's not yet starting to burn. So I want to keep that pie crust in the middle of the heat as it cooks. Now there's a lot of butter in that pie crust, so we're going to see it start to really misfold. It's not like a pancake where you've got enough cohesion in the flour so that you can flip it. You have to be a little bit more gentle with it. Obviously, if it breaks into pieces, that's fine. You have to reassemble it anyways, so no worries. Alright. So we can see the crust is already starting to get a little bit of white spots on it. That's from those areas being cooked. And the other parts are still very doughy, very buttery. So we just want to keep that moving as we can. Obviously, if you're doing this on a lower heat, you don't need to be flipping it as often. You can probably let it cook on one side for quite a bit more. But I'm trying to work with a high heat here, so I'm usually waiting, I don't know, 10, 30 seconds before I flip it. So, yeah. Also, you'll note, unlike usual pie making, I'm I am dressed. I have clothes on, and I'm drinking water. So this is different than most of the pies that I make, where I'm pretty drunk, if not when I start, but by the end usually, and naked, semi-naked, just a little. Maybe just some underwear by the end. But today is a work day. I found out, to my surprise, I've got a grant application that's due tomorrow. Thought that was due on Friday. But before I decided to work on that, I decided I'd work on this. I want to get happy birthday, and wanted to get this out to you, so. Oh. Alright. So now we can see that due to my momentary lapse of emotional negligence, it got a little brown. That's fine. That's actually going to be a really nice bit of bread. The other side's still a little underdone. I'll flip that back over. So what we're looking at here in terms of is this ready to go is we're looking for our bread to have a nice sort of even brown. And I think that's coming along pretty nicely. Right now I've got some excess heat coming through that pan, so I'm cooking on high, and it's starting to char the butter. So I wanted to take it off the heat for a second. A lot of the butter that's charring is along the sides, so I'm just trying to soak up that butter with the bread itself. Should I try to? Yeah. Awesome. So you can see the other side. It's really a nice brown. I think that piece is ready to go. I think we're ready to move on. So when I'm doing this, I'm going to be assembling in this pie tin. I'm taking the pan off the heat, gonna let the burner go. Wow, that looks purple in the camera. It's not actually purple, or by my eyes. Anyways, so I have moved the pie crust over to the pie tin. It's a little hot. It's a little hot. So again, let's try and set that up there. All right. So when we're assembling this, we're really just going to do that. We're going to lay it up against the side. Again, watch your fingers. It can be a little hot. If you don't want to touch it outright, get a spatula and you just kind of, there you go. What we're looking to do is just kind of form it against the pie tin. All right. So now we're ready for the next piece. And I think, yeah, I'm going to stop it now. I'm just going to cook up the rest of it. Going back to the pie crust. So, this is the way I assemble the pie. You see, this is the first piece of it. This is the second piece of it. And I'm just kind of layering them. I'm going to layer the next piece sort of on top. See how they're sort of sitting on edge with each other? Let me see if I can. So they're sort of sitting on edge of each other. There's a little bit of overlap. I'm going to continue to overlap them as I go around the pan. Once I've got that overlap, we're going to fill it. So back to making more pie crust. All right, and now we're all done baking the pieces and assembling them. So here's, Jesus, these angles are weird. Okay, here's the assembled piece. I've kind of ringed it around the edge. There's gaps in between some of them. That's fine. Doesn't really matter. We're gonna put the apple pie filling on top anyways, so you won't really see those things. And when you cut into it, well, yeah, that's its own adventure. So here we've got the apples. Now I took them off heat a while ago. They're pretty well cooled down. I want to add the nutmeg and cinnamon. Now the trick is I want the nutmeg and cinnamon to really taste fresh, so I didn't add it in at the beginning. I'm gonna add them in now, but to make sure that they're well mixed in, I'm going to put them into a little bit of a suspension first and then mix them in. So that suspension is going to be a little bit of butter, of course. So for this part, I usually just took a little bit of butter and microwave it for just a second so that it melts down, and then we can mix everything in. Now, as far as the butter goes, if you're not feeling like using butter, you can use lemon juice. So lemon juice is a good substitute. It's going to add a little bit of brightness to the apples. You might want to add that anyways if you've got what you feel are like under flavorful apples. But for the butter, I usually go for about a spoonful. So there we go. A spoonful into my microwave-safe ramekin. You can use a glass measuring thing for this. You don't want to burn it, so usually half a minute is good. There we go. There we go. All right, so half a minute's usually good to get to the point where it's nice and liquidy. We're going to be ready to check on it every couple of seconds. We're not looking to burn it, so just keep an eye on it. All right, so nutmeg and cinnamon. Great. And yes, perfect. So it's nice and liquidy. So nutmeg and cinnamon, can measure those out. For a single pie, you can get away, because we're adding it in at the end, we don't have to put too much in.
I find about half a teaspoon of each is more than enough. So measure that out, put that in. So another one of those. So I'm using half a teaspoon of each. This is going to be very flavorful. In hindsight, for your palate, I might recommend a quarter, but half is definitely going to be very flavorful. Finally, I'm going to just put a quarter of vanilla extract in. Now, I'd already put vanilla extract in when I was cooking it down, so it's got a little bit of an infusion in it. This is going to be some fresh vanilla, so it's going to be a little bit more, a little bit stronger. Great, so now I've mixed that up. That's ready to go. And I can just pour this right on top. Well, let's get some footage of that. So here we go, right on top. Now, one of the nice things about doing it in a suspension of butter, or a suspension of anything, frankly, is after you pour it in, it's pretty easy to mix that together, get nice and solidly mixed in. Just moving it about. If I put it in dry, it would be clumping and difficult to move around, and it would take a lot more mixing, and some of that mixing would be disintegrating the apples. So I usually like to do it as a suspension. You do lose a little bit inside the your container. You can always like scoop that out if you really want to get all the flavor into it. It's usually not too important now. Woo! Buttery. So I'm getting the brown sugar. So for brown sugar, I've noticed doing the pan cook, if you put the sugar in really early, you have to put a lot of sugar into it, and then it just gets overly sweet. So I've saved the sugar for the last. I'm going to be putting in a quarter of a cup. Here's my quarter of a cup. So a quarter of a cup is 75 mils. Remember that from earlier. Boy, I bet the audio on this is just going to be terrible. Alright, so I can kind of push it down a little bit. Brown sugar is pretty flaky. Pretty spongy. Anyways, so it's going to take up some more space. You can pack it down if you really want to measure it out. This is ready to go, but again, mixing it in like this, it's just going to clump up, especially when it hits the moisture of some of those apples. So what I'm going to do is just take a little bit of water and make it into a suspension. Okay, let's get a little bit of, where can I put this phone? We've got absolutely no counter space now. Here we go. So there's that, a little bit of water there. Mix that up. So I'm not looking to make it into like liquid. I'm just looking to get it a little moist. So something like that. And if you're using a really dry brown sugar, you might want to add a little bit more water than I did. There, right into the apples. Great. So now again, I've mixed the brown sugar in with the apples. I'm just gonna spoon that around, gently mixing it. I'm not too worried about getting it entirely mixed. It's not going to be melting down the way it would if we were doing like an oven preparation. So the amount that does get mixed in is going to be just from you moving it around and mixing it yourself. But you can accomplish quite a bit in a pan. So now I'm going to get a clean fork, give it a taste test, and I'm going to get like a smaller piece. There we go. I think that's pretty good. So, things to look for: if it's too sweet, it's really too late. You can add a little bit more sugar if you think it needs it. More cinnamon, more nutmeg if you're feeling like it. You want to watch the spice level on those because it can become overpowering. If the apple itself doesn't taste great, there's a couple of things you can try, like adding lemon. That's gonna make it brighter. It's gonna bring the flavor out. If it seems a little dull, you can take a little bit of salt, mix a little bit of salt in there. Other things you can try to sort of like bring the flavors out: add a little bit of cheese, so like cheddar cheese, grate that up, add it in at this point. And that cheese is going to start to round out those flavors, so it just makes it more flavorful in sort of a well-rounded way, I guess. It's hard to really say what's happening there. Essentially, it's kind of like adding really solid butter, so it kind of brings out a lot of the less sweet and more flavorful tones of the apple. So I'm not going to be adding any cheese or salt. I think this is fine. I'm just going to move it on into the pie tin. So moving into the pie tin is going to be a two-handed affair. There we go. And I'm just using a fork to help move bits of this down into the pie crust in nice, orderly fashion. Fantastic. Great. Okay. So now I can round out those apples, make it into a nice, even layer, right like that. And we're now ready to make the top crust, and then we'll almost be done. And we're back. So I've made up the crust and made it up in the pan, just like I did with the bottom crust. Put the top crust on top. You can see I've kind of layered it on there. A little bit of apple underneath. So this is ready to go. There's a couple of things that we can do to kind of like polish it up a bit. One of those things would be to take a little bit of butter and a brush. And so, like for instance, a brush, get a little bit of butter on there, smooth it on. You can also do a glaze if you take your butter and mix in a little bit of sugar with it, preferably like a white sugar. And then if you want a little bit of apple or maybe some ginger, and you cook that down so it's a nice glaze, and then you can put a glaze on top. That's going to make it look a little bit more apple pie-like. One of the things that I've found helps is we poured the apples in and then put the crust on top, and we did all of that when the apples were cool. So the apples are kind of not set inside of the pie. So I'm going to put the whole pie into the microwave, and we just put that in for about a minute. This is a bit of a cheat. It's a microwave oven, and hypothetically this should be a recipe that you can do without an oven, but I'm willing to let a microwave oven kind of, set aside the defined parameters and limitations of this. So this is the pie, the Carolina's pan-fried apple pie, and with just a touch of microwave on the side. So that's pretty much everything. Hopefully that was more or less instructive, sort of a videography of how to make an apple pie. I do hope that you've enjoyed it. I do wish that I could be present for your birthday. Happy birthday, Feliz Aniversario. I hope you have a great time, you and your friends, and if you do happen to make an apple pie for your birthday, I hope it's fantastic. I look forward to... all right. Now it's all nice and piping hot. I could put it in for longer if I wanted it to congeal more, but I think this is just about right. Everything's kind of heated up just a little bit, so now when it cools, it's going to set together as a single piece, and that's going to give it a little bit more of texture when we're cutting it up and serving it out. So again, thanks for your time. I hope you have a wonderful birthday. If you do make a pie, I hope everybody enjoys it. And I wish I was there, but yeah, maybe next time. All right. Bom dia.